Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm Geraldine. I'm from the Half and Refer Museum, and I'm going to turn everything over to our wonderful director, Bob Prucell. Oh, yeah. Please make sure your cell phones are off. And also, just be aware if there is an emergency, we have the exit where you just came in, and there's also an exit here on the side. This goes directly to the outside.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Bob Prucell. I know many of you here. I'm the new director of the Half and Refer Museum, here 1 year now, and enjoying it immensely. I want to welcome you to the start of a year-long celebration in honor of the 250th anniversary of Brown University and the first events in the Half and Refer Museum's fall program. And we have a special program for you today, but before turning to it, let me announce our next lecture. Our next lecture is on Monday, October 6th at 5:30 in the Salomon Center, and Clark Erickson, who's professor of anthropology and curator in charge of the Americas at the University of Pennsylvania Museum, will give the Shep Kretsch lecture entitled Pre-Columbian Monumental Landscapes in the Bolivian Amazon. I said we have a special program for you today, and we do. We have a triple header in honor of the 250th anniversary. In just a few minutes, Rob Emlin, the university curator and senior lecturer in American Studies, will speak on creating relics for Brown and the search for a usable past. This afternoon at 2 o'clock, Bill Simmons, professor of anthropology and Half and Refer faculty associate, is giving a curator's tour of his exhibition, In Deo Speramus, The Symbols and Ceremonies of Brown University at Manning Hall, and I encourage you to go see that. And at 3 o'clock, in front of the museum, or actually on the quiet green side of the museum, President Christina Paxson, Professor Anthony Bogues will dedicate the New Slavery Memorial by sculptor Martin Puryear, so I encourage you to see that as well. So now let me turn things over to Bill Simmons, who will introduce Rob. Bill?
Thank you. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce Rob. I know that the last year when I was working on the Symbols and Ceremonies exhibition that's in Manning Hall now, today, it was an enormous help to me in terms of identifying objects and finding lost objects and interpreting objects that, about which there were mysteries and so forth. And so I owe a great debt of gratitude to him for that. He's an extremely learned person about Brown and its history. Brown, over the first 250 years, as you might imagine, has accumulated quite a few artifacts. And no one knows these artifacts: paintings, regalia, sports memorabilia, miscellaneous ancient symbols and so forth, sculptures, old inscriptions, shoes, you name it. And Rob is the person who's on top of all of this. No one knows Brown's treasures better than Rob does. The hidden ones as well as the ones that are out in view: sculptures, inscriptions, architecture, the works. Rob is a senior lecturer in American Studies here on the Brown campus, and as Bob mentioned, he's also our campus curator. And his knowledge of Brown's treasures is a treasure for Brown in itself. The degree to which he understands these materials and knows them by heart, I think, is really quite astounding, and never in our lifetime, I think, will we ever hear from anyone who knows them as well as he. Rob is an authority on the art and material culture of early America, and particularly of New England. He's published widely on these subjects, as well as served on the boards of numerous organizations dedicated to American and New England history, and particularly with material culture as it's a dimension of American and New England history. He's also a dedicated teacher, known to be conscientious and to take a personal interest in his students. And I think he cares for his students, and the experience that I've had either talking with Rob about his students or talking with the students is an indication that the kind of teacher that Brown hopes to have, that is the person who is known for what they do professionally, but also brings that to students, I think that Rob is a very good representative of what Brown would like its faculty members to be. I would say also that his students in their research not only enrich their own undergraduate programs, their own undergraduate education by having hands-on experience with his courses, but also in the sense that the research that they do on the projects that they work on in his class could actually contribute materially to Brown's knowledge of itself in terms of the results of this research, and some of it actually by one of his students, Mitchell Sibley, fed into the exhibit on In Deus Paramus. Rob teaches mainly at Brown, but also at RISD. His courses have included houses and their furnishings in early America, gravestones and burial grounds, American folk art, and the neoclassical ideal in America, and also, of course, on the arts and crafts movement in America. In addition to serving as campus curator, he is also a member of the Public Sculpture Committee at Brown and on the boards of directors of numerous organizations, foundations, and so forth that are concerned with American history, American material culture, the history of New England, and New England material culture. If you read his resume, any place that you may have heard of, he's on the board of directors, or was at some point in the past. He's also on the Friends of the Half-and-Reffer Museum, which we're proud to say. And on behalf of Half-and-Reffer and Brown's 250th anniversary, I'm pleased to introduce Rob for his lecture on creating relics for Brown and the search for a usable past.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you for those nice words. I really am one in a progression and a line of people who are fascinated by the history of the university, and many of the things I know because of people like Martha Mitchell and her predecessors in the archives, and so it's thank you for giving me credit for all these things which I think that I don't deserve so fully. But nice to be here and nice to be able to share with you some of the ideas that I've been having about the material history of Brown. I thought about relics at Brown when I was walking down Thayer Street 14 years ago and saw the construction underway for the Watson Institute. So here we are at George and Benevolent on Thayer Street. And there we see a sign that says, can we ding the house lights a little so that we can see these images a little bit more clearly? Yeah, put them in total darkness if it's okay with you on the fire marshal. But let's not shine the light right on the screen. How about that? Super, okay. And so we see the Watson underway here, and we see in the front yard, it's even better as long as everybody's okay with sitting in the dark, and we see a street tree on the sidewalk in the way of construction of this building. And it was at about this time that I started to hear about the beloved Elmo, the elm tree, and how the students insisted that we protect it. And that was news to me. This tree was not an essential or particularly visible part of the Brown campus. The east side of that block of Thayer Street between Benevolent and George contained early 20th century residential buildings, and the tree stood outside a modest house the university had purchased and was using as rental property. If my students ever noticed the elm tree, it was because it was next to their late and sadly lamented Ruby's Diner. This got me to thinking about the beatification of this tree, its sudden elevation to cherished and venerable icon. Elm trees can be a potent symbol of a distinguished old place, but it seemed to me that I was present at the creation of a relic. Now, if you stood up a block farther up and looked south on Thayer Street in 1995, there are these rental houses, they're multifamily houses, that Brown had acquired, but this tree was not part of some campus experience. There was no reason for everybody to fall in love with this. And so suddenly we were reading about Elmo and how much we had to protect it. And so here we are, talking this starchitect, this world-class architect, Raphael Vignoli, into creating a bay in the facade of the Watson Institute, which is rising behind this building paper here. As you can see against the white, it makes it a little bit clearer. There's the tree. And you got the guy to design his building around the tree. So I thought, well, you know something? I'm present at the creation. I'm watching Brown manufacture a relic. Elm trees can be a potent symbol of a distinguished old place. They can't be created on demand. They are a natural outcome of years and years of slow growth and careful nurturing. And since the Dutch elm disease started killing American elms in 1928, growing new ones has become a tricky and uncertain business. The 80 elm trees on the Brown campus are a perfect metaphor for one of Brown's greatest assets, which is our reputation as an established, time-tested, serious enterprise of reputation and integrity, doing business at the same address for the last 244 years. It's no coincidence that a popular book about Brown is named Gentlemen Under the Elms. The association of the university with these venerable old trees affirms our status as a landed, durable, distinguished institution. In retrospect, it seemed to me that the invention and celebration of the beloved Elmo in 1999 is a great example of a Brown relic in the making. So here we have a wonderful photograph of the quiet green surrounded by these elm trees. And there's really no difference between us and our history and these elm trees and these gracious buildings. And nothing says relic like University Hall. It's the biggest relic on campus. So those of you who were here last spring remember the relic cake that we used to celebrate the 250th anniversary. And of course, in the foreground of the University Hall, there are the elm trees. So elms add to our distinguished patrimony here. The college was built here in 1770, the college building, the College of Rhode Island, and the college edifice contained everything. Here was the president's house. Geraldine's been very helpful to me explaining about how to use the clicker, and I think within the next hour we'll have figured it out. So here is the president's house, and here is the biggest building ever constructed in the colony of Rhode Island by 1770. The trees had been stripped from College Hill over the years for fuel and for building materials, so you could stand anywhere in the north end of Narragansett Bay, and including downtown Providence, and look up and see this thing, and it was a great sign that Providence had arrived. And so this was our home for 50 years. Everything that happened here. The student dormitory, the mess hall, the chapel, the library, the master's apartments, everything was in here. This was the college edifice. This was the college. And if we were down in town in 1818 with Alvin Fisher sitting here painting, he's sitting about where the Providence Place Mall is and the train station takes, in the cove, this is Providence River coming down through here, the Mashassack, and in Water Place Park. And if we were to look up on the hillside, still 50 years later, almost 50 years later, we can still see University Hall. It's a little unfair to the artist to do this, but we're going to sneak in a little closer here, so close that we can see the weave of the canvas on his painting. But there on the ridge of the hill is the college edifice, and there's the president's house. And now we've built a grammar school across the street for the as a feeder school for the university, but really this is the only piece of real estate at the college. So you can understand the importance and the value of that in its early years, but this didn't last. You know, we think of it today as our great colonial building and as our identity, but that, by 1822, we needed a bigger residential facility. So Hope College was built to duplicate, to match University Hall. And in James Kidder's print, undated but probably made to celebrate the construction of the new building here. Here we are at Prospect and what will become Waterman Street, and the John Hay Library will be founded on this site. You can see that Hope College in this picture really dominates the scene and throws into shadow University Hall. And by 1834, when we have created a chapel upstairs and a library downstairs in Manning Hall, we are now a 3-building campus, and by now this building is 64 years old and quite literally has been through the wars. I mean, it was an occupied building with troops in the Revolutionary War and was beat up by students ever since. And so 64 years later, it was looking a little tatty. And so our solution at this point was not to proclaim our proud red brick colonial heritage, but to smear it with white cement so that it would look like this Greek temple, it would look like Manning Hall. So I don't know, I think they were not yet. I think these are Lombardy poplars. I mean, not that you would think so from this photograph. Elms are on the way. So in our earliest photographs of University Hall here from the main green, we see the vestiges of this coat of white cement in which we are matching the white Greek temple of Manning. And all the red brick has gone except for where the parging is falling off. The building looks as though it's got leprosy here. It's quite ratty looking. And so it's interesting for us to be reminded that this great icon, this great relic of the university was looking so beat up by the 1869 yearbook. So in 1883, we built Slater Hall next door, and there was a little bit of money left over, and the corporation proposed that we use that to renovate University Hall. And the students wrote in the college paper, the Brunonian, "It would be far better to expend this sum on the erection of a new hall than in repairing the present dilapidated structure. The fact that it's a relic of the past and endeared by many pleasant associations may be an argument for allowing it to stand in the opinion of antiquarians and graduates of 50 years ago, but can have little weight on the rising generation of students who know the discomfort of rooming within its hoary walls. But the university did renovate the building. Thank you, Geraldine. You reminded me. Keep reminding me which way is forward. We did renovate the building, and in part because we couldn't afford to replace it, but also because the corporation members understood that, like the elm trees that flank it, it stands as a testament to Brown's solidity and endurance over the years. To help pay for the renovation, they created mementos from salvage lumber. So we're back on the quiet green looking, and the students now have what they want, which is smart-looking awnings and a fire escape and great big windows, not those little colonial boring windows, but great big single panes of glass and a new bright olive-colored paint on the patched-up cement. So it's a modern building for the 1880s, but still it's an aging colonial building. At this point, it's 113 years old. But we decided to keep it, and we kept it because not only it was expensive to replace it, but because it represented something about Brown as a place of long standing and solidity. And we were not a fly-by-night operation. And so, in this sense, the power of having a relic overcomes the power or the need for a modern building. Well, we funded this in part by selling hunks of the building. So here is, this is a little oculus. It's probably 3 inches in diameter. You can see this little oak frame with this print on exhibition over at the John Hay Library and Jennifer Betts' terrific exhibition about relics and the history of the campus. And so we would sell these little things and sell canes made out of these oak building timbers. Here's a little manufactured acorn, and on the top is stamped in the text about the ancient building. And so these mementos made their way onto the desktops of benefactors all over town. And so here we have relics of the relic, intentional. It's not because it's cheaper to keep the building. Well, it is. In the long run, it was not cheaper. In the long run, its very presence attested to Brown's reputation as a durable place, as our brand, as a well-established and reliable place. Well, that's got us through the next 50-something years, but in 1937, when Henry Riston was hired to be president of the university, he had a couple of jobs, and one was to fix up the real estate on campus, which had languished over the years. And one job was to, in the words of Emeril Lagasse, to kick it up a notch. We needed to make Brown a more competitive place. So he instituted all sorts of new procedures that anybody who applied to colleges and did not name Brown as its first choice didn't get into Brown. And so in this way, he began to buff up Brown's brand. And nothing says Brown like University Hall. As our image of University Hall. So he went to John D. Rockefeller and said, I want your architects from colonial Williamsburg. I want to turn this into a gracious colonial building, which it had never been. It was a student dorm. But in 1939, we began what today we would call a total gut rehab. Every single piece of material inside this building went out the windows. The only thing left standing was the shell of this building. And Perry Shaw Hepburn, these colonial Williamsburg architects, designed for us a wonderful brand new interior. Here we are in the president's office, this home of gracious colonial amenity. And when we, of course, look at the paneling here, we realize that it's all from the late 30s and early 40s. It seems like a long time ago now, but it's all 20th century manufacture by colonial Williamsburg architects. So when I talk about making relics for Brown, I'm talking about making this woodwork. And I'm talking about the search for a usable past, because Henry Riston understood that if we could promote Brown's history, this became Brown's brand. This is how we compete with those schools who have more money than we do. We just say, we're here to stay. We know where we're headed because we know where we've been. And as I said earlier, we've been doing business out of the same address for a couple of centuries. So here is Colonial Williamsburg visited upon the College Hill in Providence. And with portraits here of the founder, James Manning, and his wife, Jane, our founding president. If you want to know how we link these portraits to our history, here is Henry Riston's portrait hanging in Sales Hall. And when we look up behind him, here is not only the Half-and-Refer gallery that he chose to have over one shoulder, but a university hall over the other shoulder. This is history and public image made physical for Henry Riston. Well, so nothing else says Relics at Brown like our collection of portraits, our 315 portraits. You walk into sales, and there they are. We call them men in black, but in recent years we've included portraits of women and portraits of people not wearing black and portraits of people in color. But still, this is an introductory experience for a lot of folks who walk in here and see the brown Worthies lining the walls. We did not have portraits to start with. This portrait of James Manning that I showed you, we didn't acquire until 1823, until 32 years after the man died. It wasn't so that we had a portrait gallery or a place to show them. But the Rhode Island Secretary of State, John Russell Bartlett, and a great patron of Brown, thought that it would be a fine idea to inspire young people with portraits of the great men who had gone before. And so in his catalog of portraits, this is a catalog by the library and the university in 1869, that talks about the portraits then in Rhode Island Hall. We haven't yet built Sales Hall. The collection of portraits in Rhode Island Hall now comprises 31, many of them painted from life. They represent men of all ranks and professions and include not only benefactors, officers, and graduates of the college, but also soldiers, statesmen, divines who have distinguished themselves in the annals of Rhode Island. So these are not simply decoration. They're objects lessons to us. And not only is John Russell Bartlett soliciting Brown grads and the corporation to install these here at the university, but is doing the same thing over at the State House and retrofitting the State House with images of Worthies and Brown Rhode Island governors. So by the time we actually build Sales Hall, we call it a university chapel, also houses a notable portrait gallery of former presidents and other officers of the university, as well as of distinguished alumni. These portraits are becoming relics. We are manufacturing them. Sometimes they're copies of old portraits. We go to the family and say, we don't have a picture of your forebear, may we make a copy of yours? And so they're being purposely created in order to fill the halls so that the young people at Brown will get the idea about greatness. And by greatness, we mean, down here in the corner is Charles II and Catherine Braganza, his wife, the King and Queen of England in the late 17th century, because they were ruling England when Brown got its charter. When Rhode Island got its charter. And so these are object lessons that help ennoble young people, improve their minds. Well, it doesn't take long to bring Sales Hall to overflowing. And so now some of these portraits you will find in the corporation room on the third floor of University Hall. So here with this nice colonial Williamsburg woodwork from the 1940 perhaps, and a fireplace with some birch logs in it that has never scene of fire, you can see there's no scorch marks and soot in here, is our portrait of our founding chancellor, Stephen Hopkins. Now, Stephen Hopkins, as you may know, cut quite a swath through 18th century Rhode Island. He was 11 times the governor of the colony of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. He was Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, and when it came time to choose someone to go to the Continental Congress and put his life on the line, be treasonous, and say, I will sign this Declaration of Independence from Great Britain, we chose him along with William Ellery of Newport. So he was a substantial person, but we did not have a portrait of him, and because there was no portrait made in his lifetime. That was a problem for John Trumbull, who started talking about having portraits of all the signers of the Declaration of Independence with Jefferson in Paris in the 1760s. Trumbull, the Connecticut painter, understood that if we were to have a great portrait of the Declaration of Independence, we would need to get a real picture of everybody. We couldn't just fake it. And so Jefferson, here, who gets the red vest in this picture because of his prominence, said, fine, let's get to work on this. Why don't you go around the colonies, by now it's 1791, and why don't you make portraits of all the signers before they get away? And so this picture in the Yale University Art Gallery was completed in 1796, but it's a small thing. It's just 16 by 20 or something like that. The idea was this would be writ large. It would be the size of this screen and go into the rotunda of a Capitol building that we had not yet built. And so it was that Trumbull hit the road and came to Providence, where he discovered that Stephen Hopkins had died. And he was stuck because there was no family portrait. And somebody said, oh, his son Rufus is a spitting image. So Trumbull sat down and made a sketch of the son of the great man. And so this is what went into that composite portrait. Well, it took a bit, which is to say by 1723, we had a rotunda and a Capitol building and funds and the interest in having great big heroic history paintings there, the surrender of Cornwallis, this and that, but one of them was the Declaration of Independence. It's not called the signing of the Declaration of Independence because it's got Benjamin Franklin in here, who was not a signer, so people kind of got worked into this. And in order to publicize this and to raise funds for it, Trumbull worked with Asher Benjamin, the engraver, to produce this reproductive print, and everybody could buy one. And by this time, it's, I don't know, do the math here, it's 1823, it's been 30-something years since he painted the original one, and got the sketches from all the worthies, all the signers. And so Asher Benjamin said, we really should publish a key in which we say who is who here, because many years later, both Adams and Jefferson will die this next year. It's a different generation. So in 1823, Asher Benjamin and John Trumbull sat down and created a portrait key in which we see William Ellery from Rhode Island standing next to Stephen Hopkins of Rhode Island, right here. Well, there they are. He said, I can make out Ellery, but who's the guy next to him? And Trumbull said, well, I don't know. I mean, it's been too long. It's probably Hopkins, because Hopkins was a Quaker and he would have not doffed his hat in honor of someone else. It's a matter of, he was obliged not to show deference to rank, so he would have had his hat on. So fine, they end up being described as Stephen Hopkins and William Ellery. No one at that point thought, don't they think this guy looks like the sketch? So it came to pass that when we were doing the Hall of Heroes in the State House, the Rhode Island State House, and naming all the governors and the signers, we commissioned this, we in the state of Rhode Island in the 19th century, commissioned a portrait of the guy in the hat with the guy with the spectacles, which we call Governor Stephen Hopkins and William Ellery, the two signers of the Declaration of Independence. That's how things stood until the bicentennial, when an art historian at Fordham University started going through all of Trumbull's papers and sketches and thought, I don't think so. This doesn't look at all like the sketch of Rufus Hopkins' son, spitting image of the great man. Looks like him. And so brought this to our attention in 1976. And so the state of Rhode Island said, oops, time for a new picture. So at this point, because we know more in every generation, we, the state of Rhode Island, employed a new artist named John Hagan to create a portrait from that pencil sketch showing the son of Stephen Hopkins signing the Declaration of Independence, out the window being what we now call the old State House, then the Colony House, still standing at 150 Benefit Street. So could Brown be far behind? Here is our portrait now of our founding chancellor, Stephen Hopkins. Goodbye Colony House and hello University Hall out the window. So when I'm talking about manufacturing relics, I'm talking about this. I love this picture just because it describes for us and illustrates for us the importance we place on our history, and not just out of vanity or out of puffery, but because it really distinguishes what's one of the great things about Brown. We know where we've been and we know where we're going. The other thing we see here is the Manning chair, the seat of authority. Here is the great leather chair, the armchair, that the president sits in when she assumes the seat of authority at Brown. And you can see Bill Simmons's terrific display of this and interpretation of this story in the exhibition that we'll be seeing this afternoon at the Hafenreffer. When I say seat of authority, I mean, we know that in colonial America, we inherited a tradition from Europe of having one chair, one armchair in the house. And that was the patriarch. It was the head of the table. And when the patriarch died, then the next in line, the eldest son, assumed that armchair, called a great chair in the period. And from which we get the term chairman and chair of the board. So this belonged to Stephen Hopkins, and we have known this chair throughout the 19th and 20th century as the Manning chair, because we believe that James Manning assumed this as part of the tradition of university presidents having great chairs. Yale has such a chair. Here is Barnaby Keeney in his portrait that you'll see in Sales Hall, and it's no mistake that he's got the paneling of our relic of University Hall and is leaning on the other relic, the Manning chair. And it's worked so well for President Keeney that President Hoenig did the same thing. There's the paneling, there's the Manning chair. And why would we want an uncomfortable chair? This is a chair that's typical of seating furniture made in the Iberian Peninsula in around 1700. I can assure you that it's no fun to sit in this thing. And if it's not for your size particularly, it gives you a backache to sit in it. But it has such potence as a relic, as a symbol, that it really is has had lasting value to Brown as a seat of authority, and puts us in this club of other old schools. Well, Yale has had this seat of authority since 1710. It's the chair that Yale presidents sit in when they represent the authority of the office. Here's an English chair brought to the Americas and brought to Harvard College. And it's the chair that the president sits in at Harvard. The old schools, many of them have these kinds of chairs. Here's a proof print of an engraving of the president's chair made to illustrate the history of Harvard University in 1840, when Josiah Quincy wrote the history of Harvard in 1840. That early, he needed to say, yes, we can establish our bona fides here by having a picture of this chair. And you can see how this is dated, this little slide I've got here. Once incoming President Drew Faust receives the insignia of the office, she will take her seat in the president's chair. So this is a very big deal to have an armchair like this, and the Manning chair. Of course, here's the other shoe, is that we have now discovered a letter in the university archives from one of Stephen Hopkins' descendants saying, we have this old chair, and would you like to have it as a seat of authority? This follows the publication of the history of Harvard College. So in 1844, when it was dawning on us that we had to have a great chair like this to be part of the club, then Brown was quick to say yes and install the presidents in this chair. And in no time, we had forgotten about the date of donation and said, oh, yes, this was the chair of our founding president in the 1770s. Completely untrue. But that's not the point. We create these relics. The story we suppressed, of course, is that Stephen Hopkins had bought into a privateering voyage. As I think you all know, these are licensed pirates who will go to war against the enemy of your state and take booty off of ships. In this case, it was a Spanish ship, and headed across the Mediterranean, across the Caribbean. And so American privateers brought this back, and this was Stephen Hopkins's cut of the proceeds. You have to give half to the government, and then the other half you split up among the investors, and this is what Stephen Hopkins got out of it. So it is not, it's unlikely that James Manning ever laid eyes on this chair, and the story that we didn't tell is that it's pirate loot. So, as we can read in the terrific exhibition at the Hafen River. Well, okay, so here we are with the bronze Bruno. Everybody knows this statue right next to Faunce Arch on the main green. And it was made by our subscription in 1923. But if you go around back, you will see a piece of slate laid into the limestone base. This is a piece of slate on which Roger Williams landed when he came here in 1636 to hold forth his lively experiment. So our question is, what has that got to do with anything? And, well, here's the Alonzo Chappelle painting at the RISD Museum of Roger Williams setting forth on his lively experiment, landing on the banks of the Seekonk River below Gano Street here, and the Narragansett people saying, welcome, have some tobacco and have this hawk and have some fish, and Roger Williams standing on a slate rock, which by then we really had to have. We needed to have a slate rock because at the bicentennial at Plymouth Colony from 1620 to 1820, somebody said we really need to find the rock that Plymouth pilgrims stepped ashore onto. And somebody said, oh, well, my grandfather used to know an old guy who had a grandfather who said it was that one over there, as if anybody remembered 200 years later if there was a rock, and if so, where it was. But that rock got designated at Plymouth. And so when our bicentennial came along a few years later, which is to say 1836, we said, oh, yeah, well, us too. I'm sure this was the rock that Roger Williams stepped on when he stepped ashore. So we now have slate rock along the waterfront of the Seekonk River, and this is where the story gets ugly, because the Seekonk River was filled to take out the coves and swamps and irregularities. So here is now what we call Gano Street, and this was the original waterfront. And out here is now the Dunkin' Donuts, and over here is the East Side Marketplace. Here's the old train tunnel bridge that comes out behind the East Side Marketplace, and here's the iron bridge that's always stuck in the upright position. So you can see how the land has been filled. By the 1860s, we were determined to create a more real estate and drier real estate. So the postcard here that shows the monument showing the site of the rock that we designated in the 1830s is now well inland and hard to understand as a stepping-on place. Well, the story gets ugly because in the construction of this road and the straightening out of the waterfront, the construction company was dynamiting this and managed to demolish the rock. And so here is all that was left, a couple of 100 yards inland now, of the rock where the great man set his foot. So what do we do about this? Well, we make lemonade out of lemons, I think is what happens next. We at Marble Gym, on the front steps of Marble Gym, out on Elm Grove, here's photographs around 1940, is the bronze Bruno. We've commissioned this thing. It stands on the steps, and around the back of the bronze Bruno, we have inserted a piece of this rock, because Tingley Marble Company leapt into the breach and said, oh, we need relics of the great man. And so there was not a living room, not an office, not a mantelpiece in Providence that didn't have a paperweight or an obelisk or some polished up hunk of the rock that someone had once designated as being the stepping on rock, and then we had managed to blow to smithereens. It's vanished now. So there we have an example of retrieving relics from that great slate ledge outcropping, with a considerable sentiment that old Rhode Island should not be forgotten and the lessons passed down to us, but the great men should be cherished. So these commemorative pieces, who knows where Brown got its one, but somebody thought in 1923, as we were building the pedestal for this bear, that maybe Brown should have this. And it's maybe a leap now to think about, but it follows quite closely in John Russell Bartlett's thought that we would be inspired by the example of important people who had gone before us by their portraits. And so I will not try to find my page and read you all this, but I think you get the idea, is that we associate the university with the great events of the past, not only because those were great years for that in 1923, but because it gives us a solidity, and it gives us a launching pad for our future. So here is an association between the colonial, the founding of the colony in 1636 with the antiquity and the solidity of the university. So when we talk about making a usable past, I think this is what I mean when we've got a hunk of slate that has become the very embodiment of Brown's history and the substance of Brown. It was no doubt contributed, this piece of slate, by one of the prominent citizens who saw that association between the courage and vision of Roger Williams and the mission of Brown University to prepare young people for a life of usefulness and reputation. So, was this the very rock that Roger Williams stepped on? Who knows? It's not about the geology. We're inspired to great things by linking ourselves with the founder. Which brings us back to Elmo, the cherished elm tree. As you can see in this photograph, it's beginning to die. Here is the Watson Institute being constructed, and it's always perilous to build this close to an old tree. You know, the roots of this tree go out this far. We're obviously chopping into them. And when you do that with something as fragile and vulnerable as an elm tree, it's under attack from Dutch elm disease. It's just a matter of time until we kill it, which we did. So here is the Watson today with maple trees out front. Very nice to have this, this recessed bay, but the trees out front are not Elmo. We managed to kill Elmo. However, it was Richard Fishman's idea, and I don't know anyone at Brown who makes lemonade out of lemons as well as Professor Fishman, who said, this is great, we're going to build courses around this, we're going to talk about loss, we're going to talk about the meaning of trees on the campus, and I will salvage these hunks of the tree trunks and take them up and saw them into pieces, and we'll have a course in which Brown sculpture students and RISD furniture students will make furniture. So here is a relic in the making. Here is a second act for Elmo. Here is this gorgeous grain of an elm plank coming through a planer at the sawmill. And if you go today over to the Rockefeller Library and several other places on campus, you'll see these terrific benches. This is the way we honor Elmo, the elm tree. The old elm tree on Thayer Street, and provides us with a tactile connection to Brown's distinguished history. Here's another view showing off that elm grain even better. No matter that Elmo stood nowhere near the historic campus, and no matter that we did it in, it died in the service of our making the campus a better place, and its survival in the memorial benches illustrates how creative we can be, while at the same time acknowledging that our greatness as an institution is rooted in part in our history. So the built environment of the Brown campus, the old buildings, their context, are the physical context of our experience here at the university, because they provide a sense of continuity between the university's past and the university's present. They give us perspective and the confidence to imagine a brilliant future here. Thanks very much. And thank you, Geraldine, for explaining about the clicker. I think by the time the talk was over, I think I got it right. So, well, that's a gallop through quite a lot of Brown history and a lot of the material life here at Brown. I don't know if there's something that I skated by quickly that anybody wanted to make special reference to in a question. Yes, Professor Bill Simmons. Tockwatton, Laurel Mead, Tockwatton. Okay, yeah. Okay, so there's a. I'll repeat it. So this
one day, a house went by, hot walking home, and the place was buzzing with stories about people who had seen the house go down the street. And Gordon Dean had taken that tenement house and moved it over to South Providence in some kind of a gesture of goodwill to somebody on Providence City Council. In fact, the house really did travel by the top what.
So the précis here, Professor Bill Simmons' remark is that the Tockwatton home retirement community, then located in Fox Point or India Point, heard lots of stories whose veracity we didn't actually feel the need to nail down with some of the older residents, but there was a house being moved from Brown over to the west side, and it went down past the past Tockwatton home. Yeah, a great day for the residents to sit there and watch a house going by. Well, thanks everybody for coming out of the sunshine on a day like this, and we'll see you outside when this last day of Indian summer.